On a damp, gray Thursday morning, the Charleston County Courthouse felt like any other government building. Sterile, humming with fluorescent lights, its air heavy with the weight of unspoken things. Lawyers whispered over folders, defendants glanced nervously at clocks, and tired bailiffs leaned against wood-paneled walls waiting for cases that blurred together. Nothing at first glance seemed out of place. Until she entered, she didn't arrive with fanfare or armed guards. No bodyguards, no heels, no noise, just quiet steps, soft curls tied back, a navy blouse neatly buttoned to the collar, and a pair of simple black shoes that didn't squeak on the marble floor. Her name, as listed in the witness log, was Danielle Morris. No title, no rank, just another black woman called to testify in a police brutality case that most assumed would go nowhere. Officer Bryce Keller sat at the front of the courtroom with a smirk, legs spread like he owned the room, as if this was just another formality before another inevitable dismissal. 17 years in the Charleston Police Department had taught him one thing: nothing sticks when you wear a badge and smile the right way, especially when your friend, Judge Henry Whitlow, sits on the bench. The case was already drawing murmurs. A young black man was hospitalized after a stop gone wrong. No dash cam audio, just a familiar story that rarely made it past page 5 of the local paper. When Danielle moved to sit near the witness stand, Bryce noticed her. His smirk sharpened. "Who let the maid in?" he muttered, his voice loud enough to reach at least 3 benches. A soft chuckle floated from the back of the room. Danielle didn't turn. Bryce wasn't finished. "Hope she remembers this isn't a cleaning shift." A few more chuckles now. One officer leaned over to another and whispered something about green cards. No one objected, not the judge, not the attorneys, just silence, punctuated by the shuffle of paper and the clearing of throats. Danielle sat. Her back was straight, hands folded, eyes fixed on the floor ahead of her. No flinch, no tear, just stillness, unshakable and unsettling. What Bryce didn't know, what no one in that courtroom knew, was that Danielle had not come here to speak. She had come to an end. This courtroom was not her battleground. It was her stage. Because Danielle Morris was not just a witness, not a bystander, not some clerk dragged from the street to fill a chair. For the past 10 months, she had been working under deep cover for the Department of Justice. She had sat silently through hearings, reviewed closed files after hours, followed Bryce Keller's movements, and studied Judge Whitlow's rulings, cross-referencing patterns most people wouldn't dare touch. She knew the names of every victim who never got their day in court, and the exact dollar amounts of settlements quietly paid to make them disappear. But today wasn't about data. Today was about truth. About what people say when they believe no one important is listening, when they assume power makes them untouchable, when the system protects not justice, but proximity. Danielle had walked into this room not to prove her worth, but to expose theirs. And it was working. The moment Bryce opened his mouth, the plan accelerated. Every word recorded, every smirk noted, every silence, every refusal to intervene was becoming part of a record far more damning than any testimony ever could be. Because the real story wasn't the trial in front of them. It was what would unfold after, when Danielle would no longer be just the quiet woman on the side bench, but the storm they never saw coming. The moment Officer Bryce Keller opened his mouth in court and spat out those words, he did more than insult Danielle Morris. He validated everything. Everything she had watched. Everything she had documented, everything she had warned her team about in those long, late-night meetings inside the windowless DOJ operations room. Because hate rarely hides. It disguises itself, yes, in courtrooms and policies and handshakes behind closed doors. But given the right moment, it surfaces. And Bryce gave it to them, proudly, out loud, in front of a judge who barely blinked. And that was the moment Danielle knew it was time to begin. That same afternoon, across town, people sat in a cluttered room above a federal building cafeteria. No plaques on the walls, no security cameras allowed inside. Just a whiteboard filled with red thread and names scratched in permanent marker. At the head of the table sat Riley Tran, surveillance expert, former NSA. He was reviewing audio files captured by courtroom bugs Danielle had planted over the past 2 weeks. Legal, approved, and classified. Beside him, Lena Ward, a young attorney fresh from a public defender's office, stacked file after file of dismissed complaints against Bryce Keller, complaints that had mysteriously vanished from public records. Tariq Daniels, forensic finance, monitored flagged transactions connected to Judge Whitlow's estate, unreported donations, real estate bought in cash, quiet handoffs disguised as campaign contributions, and at the center of it all was Danielle. "Play the clip, we in the hay-in," she said. Riley hit the space bar. Bryce's voice crackled through the room. "You just send it to Whitlow, he'll bury it. Deep enough, even the devil can't dig it back up." No one laughed, not here. This wasn't a room for laughter. Danielle leaned back, her fingers tapping slowly on the table. "We have him," Lena said, voice tight. "We have them both." "No," Danielle replied calmly. "We're close, but not done." She stood and circled the board, her eyes scanning the names like pieces on a chessboard. "What we need now," she continued, "is impact. Not just evidence, not just recordings. We need a moment they can't deflect, can't deny, can't spin." Tariq looked up. "So, what's the play?" Danielle turned to face them, her voice like steel beneath silk. "I stay in the courtroom. I let him keep talking. I let the judge keep ignoring. I let the system show itself for what it truly is, without knowing they're being watched." The next day in court, Danielle returned to the same seat, same blouse, same expression. Only now she was no longer invisible to everyone. She was being watched closely by a few people who had begun to sense something strange. A shift, a tension, a crack in the routine. Even the jury had started noticing. Danielle didn't speak. She didn't testify. Not yet. But she listened. She took notes. She met eyes. And Bryce? He leaned back in his chair like a man untouchable, like someone who'd won so many times he'd forgotten the game could be lost. He cracked jokes about welfare witnesses. He called a young public defender cute for a black girl. And each time Judge Whitlow said nothing, not even a glance. Danielle smiled softly to herself. Everything was unfolding exactly as it had to. That evening, back at the safe house, Kenneth Morrow, former police officer turned whistleblower, arrived with a manila envelope. "I kept this quiet," he said, placing it gently on the table. "Didn't think anyone would believe me back then. But maybe now's the time." Inside incident reports, photos, internal emails. One showed Bryce Keller standing over a black teenager in a hospital bed. Another showed Whitlow's signature on a memo suppressing the report. Danielle read in silence, her jaw tightening. "This kid," Kenneth said, "was your cousin, right?" She nodded slowly. "He never should have been there," she whispered. Kenneth hesitated. "You sure you want to make this personal?" Danielle looked up, eyes calm but lit with quiet fire. This was always personal, and now it was almost time. Almost, because soon the courtroom wouldn't be a courtroom anymore. It would be a reckoning. It happened just after 9:42 a.m. The judge had just returned from chambers, coffee in hand, still pretending not to notice the tension thickening inside the courtroom. The attorneys whispered with greater urgency now. Jurors exchanged glances. A courtroom that had once felt scripted was beginning to unravel. And in the middle of it all, Danielle Morris sat silently, hands folded in her lap, her eyes trained forward like she wasn't waiting, like she already knew what came next. Then the prosecution stood. "Your Honor," said A.D. Helena Ford, "we respectfully request to submit new evidence into the record, evidence directly tied to the behavior of both the accused and the integrity of this courtroom." There was a pause. Judge Henry Whitlow blinked once, slowly. "New evidence?" he asked with the careful dryness of a man who had rehearsed control all his life. "Yes, Your Honor, a flash drive and a sealed file folder. Both were provided by a verified witness with first-hand knowledge. We believe the court must hear it today." Judge Whitlow looked toward the bench where Danielle sat. For the first time since the trial began, his eyes lingered. Still, she didn't blink. He sighed. "Fine, let's make it quick." The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as a projection screen slid down behind the judge's bench. The flash drive was inserted, a brief moment of static, then a voice, Bryce Keller's voice. "They always show up eventually, either testifying or in cuffs. Hell, sometimes both." Laughter in the background, another officer, then more. "That judge? You just sent him the report. He'll tuck it so deep you'll forget it ever existed." You could feel the chill spread like a ripple. The words were casual, but the impact wasn't. Bryce Keller sat frozen in his seat. The audio continued. He was boasting about planting evidence, about what he called community control, about Judge Whitlow cleaning up messes. At some point, Bryce's smirk cracked. His jaw clenched. He whispered something to his lawyer, who said nothing. The screen then flicked to a scanned document, an internal memo from Whitlow's chambers, dismissing a complaint against Keller without legal justification. Below it, a signature, his. A gasp rose from the back of the courtroom. Whitlow cleared his throat. This material is authentic," Helena Ford interrupted firmly, "and admissible under Rule 403, but we'd like the court to hear from the witness directly." A pause. The judge didn't respond. He couldn't. His eyes darted toward the side of the room where Danielle had begun to rise. She walked slowly but without hesitation. The courtroom watched with the stillness of a held breath. Bryce turned in his seat to follow her with his eyes. His shoulders stiffened. Danielle stepped up to the stand, raised her right hand, swore in under oath, and then, finally, she spoke. "My name is Danielle Morris. For the past 10 months, I've been assigned by the Department of Justice to a covert investigation into systemic misconduct in the Charleston County legal system. I was placed as a civilian witness, instructed not to reveal my position unless the situation became demonstrably unsafe or ethically compromised." She looked toward Bryce. "As of this morning, the threshold has been passed." The room erupted, not in noise but in reaction. You could feel the collective mind of the courtroom stutter. Even the reporter stopped typing. Even the stenographer's fingers froze. Danielle turned to the jury. "What you've just heard is only a fragment of what we've collected. Officer Keller, Judge Whitlow, and several others are part of a protected chain of corruption that has silenced victims, buried reports, and normalized racial abuse as acceptable police culture. I am here not as a witness, but as a federal agent confirming that what has taken place in this courtroom today is no longer a trial. It is a crime scene." Bryce stood up suddenly. "She's lying," he barked. This is entrapment, a setup." His voice cracked at the end, no longer certain. Danielle didn't turn toward him. She simply addressed the court. "I have submitted to the DOJ a full report, including 42 sealed testimonies, 3 years of internal records, and 7 recordings just like the one you heard. Every word Officer Keller said has been verified. Every dismissal Judge Whitlow signed has been cross-referenced with financial records. And there is more, but that belongs in a federal hearing." Then she looked directly at Judge Whitlow. For once, he couldn't hold her gaze. "Sir, you once told a victim in this room, justice is about perception. Today, perception has changed. And justice, finally, has arrived." The bailiffs didn't need instructions. They stepped forward. Bryce took a step back. His eyes darted to the exits, to the jury, to the cameras, to the judge. But no one moved. No one shielded him. No one laughed. As the handcuffs clicked, louder than any gavel, the courtroom watched a man who thought he'd never fall realize that he already had. And Danielle, she just sat back down, calm, still, waiting for the next name to fall. The fallout began before noon. By the time Officer Bryce Keller was escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs, cameras were already rolling outside the courthouse. His name trended nationally within the hour. The words federal sting, secret investigation, and systemic corruption pulsed across every major news outlet. But what the public didn't know, what the courtroom still hadn't fully grasped, was that Bryce was never the endgame. He was only the entry point. And Danielle Morris had one more name on her board, one she'd been circling for months: Attorney General Victor Langston. That night, while the city of Charleston reeled from the news, Danielle sat alone in a corner office at the federal building. The lights were dim, her back ached. Her inbox had exploded with interview requests, political statements, and thinly veiled threats. She ignored them all. Her mind was focused on a single file. Inside it, emails, bank transfers, a recording. It was Langston's voice. Keep Keller in place. He's messy, but he serves a purpose. People like him know how to clean house in the neighborhoods we don't want headlines about. The rest? Leave to Whitlow. He knows which rulings to bury. The recording had been obtained from a former staffer who thought she was just venting to a retired police officer during a donor mixer. That officer had worn a wire. His name was Kenneth Morrow. And tonight, he walked into Danielle's office again, this time with something heavier in his eyes. "They'll come after you for this," he said quietly. "Langston isn't just a man. He's a machine." Danielle looked up from the file. "I know, but machines break." The next morning, Langston made his move. He stepped in front of cameras on the steps of the Capitol building in Columbia, South Carolina. His tone was calm, confident, exactly what had won him the public's love during the last election cycle. "This sudden courtroom disruption," he said, "is nothing more than a theatrical overreach by an overzealous operative with personal ties to one of Keller's past cases. It's political, it's personal, it's reckless." He didn't say Danielle's name, but everyone knew who he meant. What he didn't know, what he still didn't understand, was that Danielle didn't need to fight for attention. She had evidence, she had the DOJ, and she had the public's eyes wide open now. Inside the DOJ's Charleston branch, Danielle's team had tripled in size. New agents, federal auditors, internal affairs specialists. They weren't just reviewing Bryce's record anymore. They were digging into an entire network. Judge Whitlow's rulings? Under review. Over 70 past complaints, once sealed or dismissed, were being reopened. And Langston? He had become more than a name. He was now the linchpin in a system designed to protect itself. Riley, her surveillance expert, entered the room with a fresh batch of documents. "You're going to want to see this," he said, handing over a printout. Danielle read it. Her hands went still. A $250,000 campaign donation from a private corrections contractor, dated 2 weeks before Langston declined to pursue charges in a wrongful death suit involving an inmate from a Keller-led arrest. And on that donation's paperwork, a signature. Langston's. Riley nodded. "That's the opening. That's conspiracy, obstruction, and more if we dig right." Danielle leaned back, eyes sharp. "Then dig." That evening, her phone buzzed. "Unknown caller," she answered. "Ms. Morris," said a calm, calculated voice. "I believe it's time we talk. Publicly, peacefully." It was Victor Langston. She said nothing. "I've arranged a table, neutral ground, tomorrow at noon, 1 hour. We speak as leaders, not enemies." She hung up without responding, but she went. Not because she wanted to negotiate, but because she wanted to look him in the eye. The next day at a quiet rooftop restaurant overlooking the Charleston skyline, Langston sat in a tailored suit, sipping from a crystal glass of water. Danielle arrived in silence. No makeup, no entourage, just a folder. He smiled. You've caused quite a storm. Danielle sat. Truth tends to do that. Langston leaned forward, folding his hands. Let's not waste time. You have a future ahead of you. This crusade, it's going to cost you that, but I can offer you something better. Danielle's eyes narrowed. Step back. Let this case dissolve under insufficient merit. In exchange, we'll open a task force. You'll lead it. You'll be the face of reform. She didn't flinch. You mean I get to fix the house you burned down? Langston's smile thinned. I'm offering you a seat at the table. Danielle replied without blinking. I don't want a seat. I want the table flipped. She stood. This isn't a negotiation, Mr. Langston. It's a countdown. And then she walked away, calm, still. But behind her eyes, a storm was building, and this time it had a name. 3 days after the rooftop conversation, the city of Charleston felt like it was breathing differently. Tense, quiet, not the silence of peace, but the kind before a verdict. In the federal operations room, Danielle Morris stood before a wall now covered with red lines, timestamps, court filings, wire transfers, and testimony transcripts. The center of it all was no longer Bryce Keller. It was Victor Langston, State Attorney General, architect of silence. Her team had uncovered everything. Sealed settlements. Payoffs are hidden as community grants. Evidence suggests Langston was buried in exchange for political capital. Even internal memos to prosecutors directed them to avoid exposure at all costs. And then came the final piece, a recorded conversation. Langston relaxed, unguarded, speaking to a donor 2 years ago. Give them a body to hang every few years. One officer, one headline. Keeps the public convinced that something's changing. The real machine runs on what they never see. That recording went live on a Friday morning. It aired on every major network by noon. By 5 p.m., Langston's office released a statement calling it selectively edited. By 7, the Department of Justice issued a warrant. Danielle didn't watch his arrest on TV. She was already reviewing reopening motions for 16 previous cases Langston dismissed. Outside her office, protesters had gathered again. But this time they weren't demanding justice. They were celebrating it. A week later, Danielle was summoned to Washington, D.C. to testify before a federal ethics committee. The room was colder than a courtroom, sharper. No one smiled. You understand, the chairman said, that pursuing Langston threatens the credibility of an entire political system, not just his office? Danielle didn't hesitate. Then maybe it's time the system earned its credibility back. The panel didn't applaud, but they didn't interrupt her either. Her statement made front-page headlines the next morning. It ended with one sentence. Silence is not neutrality, it's complicity dressed in patience. Weeks passed. Langston resigned in disgrace. Bryce Keller was sentenced to 17 years. Judge Whitlow was disbarred and placed under permanent investigation. And Danielle, she declined every book deal, every speaking tour, every documentary pitch. She moved into a small blue building on the east side of Charleston. The sign outside it read, "Get out." And Civil Accountability Unit, we hear you. Inside, she worked quietly with a team of former defenders, investigators, and community advocates. They didn't chase headlines. They reopened cases no one remembered. They gave people back their names. One morning, a letter arrived. No return address. One line. You gave me my voice back. Danielle folded the note and placed it in her drawer next to a faded photo of her cousin, the boy who once spent 14 months in detention for a crime he didn't commit. She didn't cry. She simply got back to work. Because justice wasn't a moment. It was a road, and she had decided to walk it every single day. Message of the story. Justice doesn't need noise. It needs truth, courage, and someone willing to keep walking even when the system tells them to stop.